In today's episode of the Coral Reef Talk podcast, I'm going to be taking a look at an article about 3 of the most expensive corals. I came across an article written by Algae Barn. Today we're going to kind of skim through that article and kind of break down what it was talking about. Now, this is an article from 2017, so these are the coral prices and corals that are expensive at the time. So feel free to check out the prices of these corals and where they are today to see how much they have changed. So the beginning of the article does start off talking about how these expensive corals are not necessarily for new hobbyists, and I 100% agree with that. It does talk about these prices are really hard to grasp sometimes. Now, most of the time the prices of these corals are because there's a high demand for them and there's just not that many to meet that demand. The article states that it's because there's not many individuals of these species that have been brought into captivity, or because of the highly unusual or attractive coloration or patterns. And some of the colors on these corals are amazing. I mean, we're gonna get into the purple monster Jawbreaker here shortly, and that coral just has some psychedelic colors all over it. I mean, it's got reds, purples, greens, yellows. I mean, all the colors on this one Corellia morph or mushroom coral, and it's just insane to see some of these colors. And the more colors a coral has, most likely the more the price tag is going to be for that coral. However, with that being said, before we dive too deep into this article, there are a lot of colorful corals that don't have to break the bank. So if you're a beginner hobbyist and you're listening to this podcast episode and you're like, well, that just makes it harder for me to enter into the hobby with things getting more and more expensive, starting a reef aquarium and getting corals into a reef aquarium doesn't have to be that expensive at all. And in fact, there's so many different corals out there with a lot more color, or a lot of color, that you can add them to your reef aquarium. And mushroom corals, in fact, like Ricordia mushroom corals that come in greens and blues and oranges, and you can put them together in a kind of Ricordia mushroom garden, or create a bunch of different colonies covering the rockwork, and you create a lot of color in your reef tank that way. Acroporas, monoporas, those have a lot of colors as well. So once you advance in the hobby, maybe you start with soft corals and you work your way to more challenging corals, and once you get a feel for that, you can add color to a reef tank that doesn't have to break the bank. But let's jump into the article and look a little bit deeper. It talks about if you're planning on purchasing any of these high and expensive corals, make sure that you're not placing them in a newly established aquarium. And of course, the worst thing you could do, or the worst thing to have happen, is you spend 10 grand on a mushroom coral, put it in your tank, and it just melts away and disappears. But like it says, I do agree, none of these corals are necessarily for beginner hobbyists, because you're still learning water chemistry, water parameters, how to keep different corals, light settings. So you're going through all the different learning experiences, and once you know that, then yeah, definitely jump into something that is a little more challenging to keep. But is it really worth it? Is it really worth to spend $10,000 on a single polyp? Let's get into it. So the very first coral that they're talking about here is the purple monster Jawbreaker, and Reef Builders did a video about the $10,000 coral. Now this coral can sell at $10,000. As shocking as that may sound, coming from the article, it says once you see just how beautiful this mushroom is, the price starts to make sense. I will say what makes sense about this coral is that the colors on it are fantastic. I mean, we've seen expensive corals before, the Eclectus mushroom coral with the reds and greenish yellows in there, and those were fetching a pretty penny, and they're still pretty valuable or pretty pricey today. Whenever you think of getting a coral for like $20 a head, or a small zoanthid colony for like $25 or $10, or even other mushroom corals, these are fetching thousands of dollars for a single mushroom. Now they do say once a coral is in captivity and people start growing these out and fragging them, that the prices do end up coming down, and that is true, but it can take a while sometimes, or the prices can slowly go down. But in more recent years, we've seen prices go up on certain corals, and I believe that's from import and exporting of corals and also availability. But let me know in the comments below what you think about higher prices of corals and what you think about the overall cost of entry to having a reef aquarium in 2023. But getting back to the Purple Monster Jawbreaker, like I said, this thing has purple, greens, reds, yellows, a little bit of orange in there, pretty psychedelic looking coral, so it's understandably that it would fetch a higher price, but $10,000, I don't think the average reef keeper is going to pay $10,000 for that coral. But like it was mentioned in the video from Reef Builders in 2017, I believe that article and video came out, they talked about how the $10,000 price tag is not necessarily going to be from a collector. It's going to be purchased from someone who is willing to grow out this coral to benefit the hobby. So years and years later, this coral's prices could come down because we're seeing a lot more colorful, more amazing looking corals in the hobby nowadays, and prices will come down. And that leads me to the next coral in the article, the WWC or Worldwide Corals Bounce Mushroom, also known as the OG Bounce. When that was initially purchased in 2015, a single mushroom sold for $6,000 at a Reefapalooza, and $10,000, $6,000, I mean thousands of dollars for a single mushroom coral is pretty pricey. But if you do have some experience behind you in your reef keeping journey and you do want an OG bounce mushroom, I believe last year at Reefapalooza I saw a small OG bounce that I could get for $200. So the range of price now has gone down from $6,000 to a few $100s per mushroom. So definitely these are becoming more affordable, and maybe we'll see that with the Purple Monster Jawbreaker if we haven't already, that the prices will start to come down. But the OG bounce are a little more affordable. It's still in the hundreds of dollars, which your average reefer, I don't know, is going to be looking to spend that. They're really cool to see in person. So if you have the chance to go to a Reefapalooza or a Magna or any kind of frag swap where there's multiple vendors there and you come across some of these corals, there's some really awesome corals out there. I did a video recently with Levi Peterson where we had $50 to spend to find the best corals that we could. Nowadays, $50 can get you maybe 1 or 2 corals depending on what you're looking for. I remember when I first started, even less than 10 years ago, you could get a torch coral for $20 a head. Hammer corals and frog spawn corals the same way, $20, $25. There's some insane colors of torch corals now, and you're looking at torch corals even that are $400 to $700 for like the golden torches and things like that. But sometimes when you're thinking of something that has a high price tag, you're thinking of, well, in the reef aquarium hobby, you're thinking of a lot of color, something that is pretty big, that's going to add some flow to your tank like a torch coral. But so far the first 2 in this article has been mushroom corals, but the next coral that the article talks about sold for $2,000 for a single polyp, and that is the Grandmaster Crack Zoanthid coral, and it's by far one of the most expensive corals for its size. So the article speaks about a single polyp grows to about the size of a dime, and whenever you purchase this coral, it's even smaller than that. Now, since this article, the Grandmaster Crack Zoanthid price has gone down quite a bit, but it is over $100 for a single polyp still. So in some cases, this is where these corals started, but the prices have gone down. As you know, zoanthids, either you have like a really good experience or mixed experience with zoanthids. Some of them do really well and they grow out really fast. Some of them take their time to grow out in your reef tank, and some zoanthid corals can just melt over time depending on your tank's parameters. But the Grandmaster Crack has a gold and green striped skirt with red and purple blue speckled mouth, and the person writing the article says it's hard to rationalize such a small coral for that size, but as someone who's gotten the pleasure to see one of these in person, that the price makes sense. I don't know for the average reef keeper that the price makes sense for these corals. Let me know in the comments below what you think again about pricing of corals, especially ones that have insane colors, do they justify thousands of dollars for that coral? Or just what do you think about coral pricing overall? Do you think that some of the pricing is not that consistent? But I guess in any hobby where you're collecting something, especially if you look at another hobby like the trading card industry, some of those pieces of cardboard can be thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. So its beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and it's all really what you're worth paying for these expensive corals and just the supply and demand of each corals. But getting back to the Grandmaster cracked zoanthid coral, they go on to say that this zoanthid offers a stunning coloration but can be difficult to keep alive in the aquarium. It requires pristine water conditions with no swings of any sort, and many people have told horror stories about purchasing these zoas and just having them slowly melt away and die in their aquariums. And you're going to experience coral loss, but do you want to spend $2,000, $6,000, and $10,000 to experience that coral loss? So you gotta, I guess that's a risk and reward type thing as well. I just wanted to talk about this today because I go to these shows, I go to Reefapalooza a lot, and I take a look at different products and different corals and talk to a lot of different people to bring you guys content here on the Coral Reef Talk podcast, as well as the Coral Reef Talk YouTube channel. And I just see these high priced corals all the time, and I know for me, I'm not necessarily going to spend thousands of dollars on one single coral polyp, even though I'm a huge fan of the hobby. Everything about this hobby is very fascinating, to the bacteria in our reef tank, to the certain corals that we can care for, to the different types of tanks that you can have. I think it's all wonderful and very fascinating, but am I going to spend $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 on one coral? No, I don't think I can do that. But let me know in the comments or show notes below what you think about all of this information. What is your view on coral pricing and corals in general? Or do you think it's awesome that there's corals out there that are worth this much money or going for this much money in the hobby, and it's like the trading card thing, that there's going to be very high-end valuable things to collect that are one-of-a-kind type things, and that's awesome for the hobby, versus learning how to take care of a coral, keeping them alive, propagating them, and expanding them for the enjoyment of the hobby. Kind of like the reefer's code, where if something's doing really well in your tank, you can share it with a friend. And so that's a whole different video for a whole different time. The reefer's code, I do plan on doing a video about that. But let me know what you think. I would love to hear the community's thoughts on this. Am I crazy for thinking the way that I'm thinking about these high-priced corals, or is this something that you guys are feeling as well? Thank you so much for listening. If you're listening to the audio version only of the podcast, thank you so much for watching. If you're here on YouTube, thank you so much for subscribing, and I will see you in the next one.